This is another lesson in learning synthesis with pure data. This is actually going to be a combined lesson of lessons 10, 11, and 12, just because they cover slightly different subjects, but I'm grouping them all together because they're all related. We're going to be adding FM and AM synthesis to our synthesizer. That would be frequency modulation and amplitude modulation. Basically, we'll make a module that allows us to do frequency modulation, another module that allows us to make amplitude modulation, and then we're going to add to both of these modules envelopes so that we can control the degree to which these modulators are working over the course of an event. So, without any further ado, let's begin the lessons. Okay, so here we are, as usual, starting off at my webpage, lwmmusic.com. I'm on the learning page, which is where you can find the videos. This is the last lesson, lesson 9, and now we're going to do lesson 10, which is part of a 3-part series, AM and FM synthesis, and we're going to start with FM synthesis here in lesson 10. So basically, after I finish this video, go right up here above this one, and you'll be able to download the patches from the link right below it. It will say lesson 10. So let me pull this down, and I'm going to pull up my folder here, and we're going to look at lesson 10. The modules patch is the patch that you want to open. It contains all the modules that we're working with. And actually, I want to zoom in on this, so I'm going to move these modules up. But let me show you what we have here. Move this to the side and move this down a little bit. There we go. Basically, I've already made the frequency modulation oscillator right here. And it was based off of the carrier oscillator that was already made. In the last lesson, we made 2 of them. Or, well, basically we loaded the same patch twice, so that way we have 2 signal change with 2 carrier oscillators. With the new addition of octave, semitone, and sense pitch shifting, so that way you can shift the pitch to a variety of intervals as well as degrees between the intervals for detuning and chorusing, as well as a basic 2-pitch harmony. And so this one on the right now is hooked up to the new frequency modulating oscillator. Frequency modulation, I'm going to explain it real quick here and demonstrate it, is basically when you take the frequency of an oscillator and then you modulate it by basically bending that frequency, and typically you do that in a way that is regular, cyclical, and the obvious way of doing that is with another oscillator. So, right now, if I play this note, since I'm not changing any of the parameters here, we're now playing an A, and I believe that's 440. So as we're hearing that, just think, okay, that's 440 hertz. And then up here, this oscillator is going to be bending that pitch. This is the frequency at which it bends it. This will be executing a sine wave that will bend it up and down. It'll go above 440 and down below 440. And this is the speed at which it does it. Now, in addition to its speed, we need to set also the index. That's the amount. And right now, the way I have index set up is, see, I pushed it up a little bit. It says it's at 0.04. You can think of that as a percent. Because basically, this oscillator receives from this one, through this cable right here, the current frequency that's coming out. And then what it does is it multiplies that by 0.04. And in that case, 4% of 440 is 16, like 18.24, something like that hertz. And so basically it'll be bending it that amount in hertz up and down, above and below the 440 mark. Hold on, something else I want to do. This is going to throw us off. The frequency modulation oscillator is just on the one signal chain here, meaning it's on one side. So let me disconnect this temporarily. That's the dual oscillator on the other side that's also coming through. There we go. So now we hear this oscillator bending up and down in frequency, moving up and down around 16 or so hertz, 18 hertz, somewhere in that ballpark, above and below 440 hertz. So the more that you adjust the amount here, also known as the index, the modulation index, the wider of a range it will oscillate. And when you put it up to 100% here, basically, it will bend down to a point where you hear it dip out there. It basically bends down to a point where it goes to 0 hertz. Because 100% of 440 is 100%. It'll bend up to 880 and down to 0. Because it's bending 440 above and 440 below 440 hertz. So that's how this is set up. Let me just put it on a light amount here. And the frequency range goes from 0 to 100. You see, when we cross there, we're now getting to the point where the oscillations become so fast that you don't really discern them individually anymore, and they become a timbral effect. Basically, when you have a slow frequency modulation, you get vibrato. When you have fast frequency modulation, or you cross a certain threshold, right about here, you also hear these other tones arise in the sound. Those tones are called sidebands, and they're a way of creating more harmonic richness, basically like extra partials. And so you're just using two oscillators to do it. So FM is a type of distortion technique in which you can create new overtone material. Well, not necessarily overtones, but new harmonic material. And that's part of what FM synthesis is used for. So you can have both vibrato or this timbral effect. And with this multiplier, you can get even higher frequencies. This goes 0 to 100. If I put this on, this now multiplies it by 10. So now, well, if we go all the way down, it's like 10, and it can go up to 1,000, I believe. Now this may just say 100, but multiply that by 10, and you get 1,000. Here you can get 10,000. And so you can get all sorts of side bands with this. Now this becomes more useful later when we add an envelope to this, so that basically these effects can be shaped over time. But right now, just want to show you how the frequency modulation oscillator was made and how it works. So here we have an outlet that sends the frequency through a left inlet up here. So this oscillator knows what the frequency is that's being played. Now the reason why I have it coming out of here is, you see these settings here allow me to shift this up an octave, like that, or shift it some semitones. So now we're going to be up an octave and a fifth. And what this does is this adjusts with it. And so what we get as a result is we have the ability now that if the user changes what the frequency will be coming out of these, with each note played, whatever the frequency is here will come out as such. It doesn't take it from the MIDI signal, so it doesn't just determine it from what key is being pressed. It determines it from what frequency is actually being played, because of course it can be adjusted here. So the way that works, let me open up this oscillator so you can see. Basically, this is the outlet that carries it, and here's the line going out from the central module here. This is what we worked with last time in being able to take in these octave, semitone, and sense adjustments, as well as pitch bend. And then in here, that's where the frequency gets determined. Well, it comes out here and goes to the oscillators, but it also goes out this separate line, which obviously is this line here that goes out, and that way it can go into this oscillator. Then the resulting signal from here goes out through this audio cable, and it actually connects here to the left inlet on the carrier oscillator, which I will open again. You see that comes in here and goes into the module here, and here it is, the rightmost inlet tilde, brings that audio rate signal in and adds it to the signal being produced here, which is the frequency. It then goes to the oscillators here. So this is actually where the oscillators oscillate the signal that gets heard. This is the carrier oscillator, and that's the one that carries the sound, basically. The modulation oscillator basically modulates the frequency right here. Frequency modulation. It's added to, so as it bends up, it increases the frequency, and as it goes down, it's a negative value coming in at the audio rate. So it's really like subtracting in that case. And so it bends down below the center or the frequency being played. So that's how it works inside the patch. Now let's look inside this one, because this is basically a copy of the carrier oscillator. It's just it needed some things to be added and some things to be taken away. For example, phase is gone. It's not that useful in the use of an FM oscillator. So it's gone. In that space I have the frequency slider here and the multiplier, so you can get all variety of frequencies, slow and fast. And then here is the index. I had to make room for that. And then here is a toggle that allows me to turn on or off whether or not this index gets affected by the mod wheel. When it's clicked on, I can use the mod wheel and change the amount in the index there. Let's turn this down here to a slow rate. Don't hear anything because the index is all the way down. Now I'm bending it up with the mod wheel. There you go. So anyway, let's look inside here to see more of what is going on. Basically, we have inlets at the top here. These are the inlets. This is where the carrier frequency comes in, and it goes into the module here where the magic happens. And here's where the MIDI signal comes in. The only MIDI signal being used is the mod wheel. It goes through the valve subpatch that I made and is described in prior videos. So I'm not going to describe it in detail here, but basically it keeps repeated numbers from coming through. Gets divided by 127, making it a range of 0 to 1, and then it goes into the spigot, which gets turned on and off by the toggle switch here. When it's off, then the mod wheel numbers don't come through. When it's on, they do come through, and they basically adjust the index, which is a range of 0 to 1. You divide the mod wheel's numbers, a range of 0 to 127, by 127, and you get the range 0 to 1. Frequency slider and multiplier work in tandem through this stuff here, where basically the frequency comes in. Well, actually, this is the multiplier here. It's a radio button object, which basically, as you select the 4 different spaces here, it's 0, 1, 2, 3. And up here is the select for that, 0, 1, 2, 3. Depending on which box is selected, it will bang out a 1, 10, 100, or 1,000 here. And that gets multiplied by the frequency slider right here, getting a result, allowing us to have a wide range of frequencies. Now, since this is a range of 0 to 100, basically 100 times 1,000, yeah, that's 100,000. That's way above the audible range of frequencies, and but this is a modulation oscillator, so that really high frequency modulation is, well, I just threw it in and it sounded cool up that high, some of the stuff, so I left it in like that. But anyway, down here, this is where all the stuff takes place. Inside here, it's just like the carrier oscillator module, where basically you have your waveform selected here. Same 4 waveforms: sine, triangle, pulse, and sawtooth. Here is where the frequency comes in. It's an audio rate signal at this point. Basically, the multiplier and the frequency slider together determine the frequency, and at this point it's already an audio rate goes into the oscillators there. And then up here we have the index value being multiplied by the carrier frequency, and they become an audio rate here. I have the pack and line objects here. Here, let me make this more visible. There's space here, might as well use it. By basically going through these, what it does is it smooths it out, makes it any transition between the numbers smoother and more incremental at the audio rate, so it sounds like a smooth bend rather than any kind of skips that would elicit artifacts. So basically your index and carrier frequency are multiplied by one another, and down here they basically determine what would be the amplitude of the frequency modulation oscillator. But since this doesn't sound, its signal determines the bending of the frequency of another oscillator, the carrier. This ends up being, rather than amplitude, really it's the amount that it bends up and down in that case. So it's really quite simple. PWM still over here for the pulse wave. So basically we now have frequency modulation. Now, of course, this won't be very useful as a timbral effect until I put in the envelopes, but that's in lesson 12. Lesson 11, we're going to go into amplitude modulation. So, just like in this example where we have the FM oscillator working with this carrier oscillator, in the next lesson we're going to add an AM oscillator to affect this oscillator. So that way each carrier has an AM or an FM modulator that will work with it. So anytime you want FM modulation, you do it on this signal chain, and anytime you want AM modulation, it goes on this signal chain. So that'll be in our next video, lesson 11. So I'll see you then. Okay, so this is lesson 11, and in this lesson we're going to add an AM amplitude modulation oscillator to the one signal chain picking up right where we left off in lesson 10. Okay, so let me open up the modules patch right here. And I usually like to zoom in. In this case, I think I will. Oh, I'm in run mode. That's why I can't move it. There we go. Okay, but first, before I do that, what I want to do is just show you here. We have two source carrier oscillators here. And then one goes through amplitude modulation on this side. One goes through frequency modulation on this side. Then they go through envelopes and into the output. So, since last time we looked at the frequency modulation already, I'm going to disconnect it so we can just hear the amplitude modulation oscillator right now. In the future, there's going to be a mixer section, so I can mix these two signals together in any number of ways, and in that case, wouldn't have to do these things here to just hear one and not the other. So anyway, well, never mind. Anyway, let's just go on. Here we have the carrier oscillator and the amplitude modulation oscillator. The FM oscillator took a little bit more patching in that basically the carrier frequency was sent into here, and then the signal comes out to here, and then the actual audio signal continues from the carrier down to the envelope here. Here they're in line with one another and much more straightforward. Because we're just affecting amplitude, the signal coming out of the carrier oscillator right here goes straight into the AM oscillator, where basically this oscillator can modify it and basically change the amplitude. Since at this point any multiplication of the signal is really amplitude modulation, I could put it right in line and then its output goes right into the envelope here. There is a line from the MIDI module hooked up to the AM oscillator though, and we'll look at that in a minute. But for right now, let's just hear it a little bit. I'm going to go to MIDI settings and make sure my keyboard is up and ready to go. There we go. So now, okay, I'm not hearing sound. I'm not hearing sound. Let's see here. Alright, I need to fix something. I thought I already did this, but it's something obviously I didn't do. We're going to see what that is in a moment, but right now we can hear amplitude modulation as I turn this up. Otherwise, the kind of pulsing effect is slight and you don't hear it as well. So basically, the amplitude is being modulated in that it's basically being increase and decrease, and it's being done such with this waveform here. Basically, you're seeing the waveform up here that's being generated come through here, and you see how it's expanding and contracting. That's what the amplitude modulation oscillator is doing, and that's generally what they do. It has the four wave shapes on it here. That's a triangle. Basically what it's doing is it's going up in a straight line and down in a straight diagonal line, rather than in curves like the initial oscillator. This one really is a cosine oscillator, kind of like a sine wave, but it's set to go between 0 and 1. So that way you basically have it going between on and off. Depends on how much you have the index turned up. If I turn it up all the way, now it's really on and off. Otherwise, it's degrees of it here. This is the amount at which it expands and contracts the waveform. But let's see, we also have the square wave. Now that adds a little bit of a snap to it because the square wave goes up straight in a vertical line and down straight. So it's basically, because of that straight line, it creates an artifact or a snap sound when it goes up. And the sawtooth does something similar, where basically you hear that snap when it goes straight up, and then it goes down in a ramp, and then straight up again, down in a ramp. So when it goes straight up, you hear the snap. But that's part of the effect. So as I speed it up, and increase and decrease the index here, there you go. You can bring that in and out. Now if you choose to go with the smooth cosine wave, you get an effect like this. Just like with the FM oscillator, when you speed it up, you create sidebands, you create a timbral effect by the fast modulation. And just like the FM oscillator, it also has a multiplier here. You know, where you can basically find what you're looking for and set it. And I added, we'll also do the FM oscillator here, I added an extra option here. Let's go down to the slower speeds here. This is the mod wheel selector. If you have it on, the mod wheel will now affect the frequency. So you can adjust frequency with that. And you can have it do the amount as well, which is the index. Oh, need to have a frequency set here to hear it. And you can have it affect both by having them both checked off. So it's up to you whether you have them checked off or not, and what things you want the mod wheel to control. So anyway, let's just see how it works on the inside, and let's fix that one thing that I noticed from the beginning. Basically, we have two inlets here. One is the audio signal. This is the thing that gets modulated. And also I take in MIDI here, mostly just the mod wheel. Or not mostly, it is just the mod wheel. Move that over. There we go. So the mod wheel gets its input here, determined by whether these toggles are checked on or off, which open and close the spigots here. When they're checked off, the spigots do flow the numbers here, just like we saw in the last video, the last lesson, in the FM module, where basically I had the same effect coming through. The multiplier and the frequency work the same way as they did in the FM oscillator right here. But where the difference is inside here in the module. Here's where we have the same kind of like use of the carrier oscillators set up, where the waveforms get selected, and you have the four different oscillators here to oscillate those waveforms. Here's PWM control. But here also I have coming in the signal and then the index, because basically you need the signal to come through to be modulated right down here. Basically the signal comes through, and this amplitude modulation is like the amplitude end or the right inlet of the amplifier. So right here is where it happens. The index is here, where basically these oscillators are outputting the oscillation, and it go through these two amplifiers here, well, star tilde and a plus tilde. Now this is where I think I heard an issue before. Basically the idea is, as the index comes through, which is our amount. And in this case, it's just a range of 0 to 1. It's not like the FM module where actually you had a carrier frequency range that was being multiplied in. This is just a range of 0 to 1. So when it comes through here, right now it's at 0. If it's 0 and it goes here to be multiplied and then just goes straight on, whenever you have the module index down, or the modulation index down at 0, you will have no signal. And the idea is you want the signal to come through when it's off. You just don't want to hear modulation. You don't want the whole sound chain to be turned off. So in order to get around that, I added a little bit of extra math here, where this 0 comes through a swap 1 object, where basically the 0 comes in this inlet and swap makes it come out the opposite outlet. And then whatever comes through this inlet, or the creation argument, which is what's actually the case, the 1 here, comes out the left outlet. So basically what happens is numbers come through here and change. 1 subtracts that number, and basically that number gets subtracted from 1, and the result comes here. So as you see, it's 0 here, but it's the inverse here, it's 1. And that number gets added here. These all go through pack and line objects to make it a smooth transition. But basically, the 0 and the 1 work in tandem here, where as this number increases, this number decreases. And so basically, as you turn up your index, this goes down so you don't clip. But as you turn up your index, you hear more of the modulation and less of the straight signal, or the unaffected signal. But when you turn your index off or reduce it a lot, basically the unmodified signal will come through. And that's the whole idea. I think the problem that I had to begin with when opening the patch was the fact that the numbers weren't banged through. When it opens up, everything's a default 0. So what I would need is simply to put a load bang here, which would bang this 0 through upon loading, and that would make the 1 occur here. So we would have sound. Basically, I just needed to add that. So now, that should be the case. Let's test it out. I think I described everything in pretty good detail, so let's just test this. And I'll leave this fix in for the download, so when you download it, it's already fixed. Modules. Alright, now the first thing I have to do is make sure my keyboard is the input device, and it never is. I always have to set it. Okay. Yep, so you see right to begin with, it's sounding. And turn it on, turn it off, we're good. Okay, but one thing is I disconnected this before and then I saved it. So let's connect the envelope here to this side. And then we're good to go. Okay, so that is lesson 11. In lesson 12, we're going to move these guys out of the way, but basically have an additional envelope section to the AM and FM oscillators so that they can be controlled over time. Basically, you want their effects to be able to change over time, which gives it a more dynamic quality. And basically, in order to make sounds more realistic in some cases, or robust in other cases, you want that changing tone. You don't want it to be absolutely cyclical, or else it won't be as useful. So part of that is done with an envelope, and so we will see the envelope added next time. Though I don't need this to be this wide. There we go. Okay, see you in lesson 12. Okay, so now we're going to look at the lesson 12 material here. Folder looks the same. There are no new files. However, two of the modules have been expanded. So I'm going to open the modules patch, and here we go. Basically, I took the AM and the FM modules and expanded them to include an envelope section down here. I moved their indexes down here as well. Just been trying to find a way to space things out to make it look good. Probably I will maybe expand these a little bit since I have space for them now. But in any case, let's hook up the keyboard here and hear how it sounds. There we go. So, this is the AM side of things right here. Basically what's changed is now we have an envelope. So, for example, if I have this quick attack, a longer decay, and reduce the sustain, what we will hear as soon as I turn this up, give it some frequency, give it some index, is basically the index. You won't see it move, but basically after the attack and decay section during the sustain, it will decrease. So what you hear there is on the left side is the amplitude modulation, on the right side is just the stable tone. And what you hear is at first it's more intense and then it backs off. And that's because the index is up for this section, and then as you see the sustain level is down here. So this works the same way as this one, except instead of controlling amplitude, this controls just the index level of the oscillator. So that way the amount of amplitude modulation changes over the course of the pitch, well, as long as you hold it. So there at the beginning you hear the AM effect, and then it backs off a lot. Now you don't have to back off that much. Still more pronounced at the beginning. And then it reduces somewhat. So that's the idea, is for these tones to have some sort of adjustment to them. Now basically, during the attack, it will rise to the level that you have set here. If you have it at 0, you don't hear anything. But basically, it's like as if the index were going up and back down again over the course of the envelope. And I did the same thing with the FM oscillator here. Basically, let's set some settings here. I'm going to put this on a multiplier here. There we go. Let's reduce it during the sustain. Basically, since you hear things out one side or the other, they don't mix together well, but you can use these different effects in combining the two signal chains together to a great deal of effect there. Another thing I was thinking of doing was having it affect also the speed, the frequency speed, but I'm not sure yet. I think I might add a toggle that allows you to turn that on or off, whether or not it affects just index or the envelope also affects the frequency. But I'll let you know before the next episode, or with the next episode, what I decide. In any case, right now, what we have here is something more dynamic, so let's see how it works. Let's zoom in to see the patching. Okay, so basically I kind of copied and pasted a lot of stuff over. The duration, attack, decay, sustain, release. If you don't remember these very well, just look at the video on the ADSR envelope, one of my earlier videos, because these are the same parameters have been brought over. And I also brought over their initial values here, hooked up the load bang, getting kind of cluttered there. But in any case, it works, so a little clutter never hurt nobody, except for Crafty. Doesn't like it. So anyway, here we go. The ADSR now, instead of controlling amplitude, comes over here, where in this module, basically I have the guts of the ADSR module. Basically all of its, all the objects and things that make it happen are in here. And it gets fed in with velocity, because it needs that. And then it also receives from over here the index, as well as the ADSR settings, and the duration come in here. So basically over the course of playing the note, it can make the index change. And everything else is the same. The signal comes through here, and this is where the actual amplitude modulation occurs. But right here, where the index normally comes in, this module is coming in with the changes in index. So let me open it up. Basically, this is the same as the ADSR's internal workings. The only thing that's different is, first of all, the velocity here is useful for triggering when things start, and then also when the release is to occur. So it comes through with the 0, but I change this section. Instead of it passing velocity through, we don't want note velocity here, because that's not going to help anything. We just want the zeros to come through, or the non-zero number to come through to say when the note starts and when it's been released. So what happens is when the non-zero number comes through, comes out this outlet, and it triggers a bang. And what it does is it bangs this float box through. And what's being stored in the float box is the actual index value. Right now it's at 0, but whatever its value is gets banged through, and that gets treated as velocity was treated in the ADSR. So it goes through all the segments of attack, decay, sustain, release, and comes out the bottom. And it comes out as a regular line signal, not a line tilde, because it's still numbers at this point. So it comes out at the rate of milliseconds, the control rate, rather than the audio rate. But then in here, pretty much right away, or pretty soon, the index is converted into audio here. But because of the way it needs to be handled, I showed you in the last lesson where this is to prevent turning the index down from shutting off signal altogether. Basically, this allows you to reduce the index and basically mix between a modulated and an unmodulated signal. So that's basically how it works. And let's look at the FM section. Roughly the same thing. It's once again affecting index, but since that index is all the way over here, since that index is in this case not amplitude, it's treated a little bit differently. Is also in this case the index, remember, gets multiplied by the carrier frequency, which comes in here. So it's the same structure. Here's the ADSR here. They feed into this module here, which goes into the main module here. So this is the same on the inside. It receives velocity just for notes starting and stopping, and it does the same thing on the inside with the index, where the index is stored here and gets banged through instead of velocity. So what happens as a result here, open this section, this, in this case, it's already an audio signal. I had a line tilde on the outside. So that comes through, and it comes straight in here. where it affects the amount, or this amplifier, on the oscillator. So it's a much more direct approach because it does not need the other things happening. Well, it does go through here where it gets multiplied by the carrier frequency, but it doesn't need the extra stuff to turn on and off. Well, to keep it from turning off the signal. So that's that. It's actually a lot more laborious of a setup task, but it's quite simple things that make it work. As long as you understand how this worked, applying it to here is really quite simple. Okay, so that's lesson 12. We now have envelope control over the amplitude and frequency modulations. So in lesson 13, we'll do a little catch up to see what improvements I make to this, because there's some things I'd like to try out to see if I can improve some things. And then after that, what I want to do is add some filters. They'd probably be up here. Basically some low pass filters, something like that, going into the envelope so that you can take all the sound development that has already taken place and expand on it a little bit more by being able to filter out some ranges of frequencies so that you could kind of make the sound you're making more precise. Um, Basically, you'll see in the next lesson. All right, so that'll be lesson 13. See you then. Okay, so I hope you found these 3 lessons rewarding and fulfilling. Crafty just wants to let you all know that he thinks 34 subscribers just isn't enough. So please hit that subscribe button.